So what is this geologic timetable that geologists, evolutionists are constantly talking about and gives the universe and the earth so many millions of years of age? How did they arrive at these ages? Let's just take a look. We're in K27.htm. Oops, I guess we could key the letters in. Keyboard isn't working. There he is. K27.htm. Sometimes these computers, they get ornery. You haven't fed them or something. It's like my cat. I have an imaginary cat. I don't feed it and it still doesn't do right. Okay, geologic timetable. I called it the presupposed geologic timetable, largely because there's no evidence of actually how old these items are that they give ages to, these rock strata. The rock systems of geology and their corresponding geologic ages have for many years been worked up in the form of an erroneous geologic timetable. Such a presentation obviously indicates a gradual progression of life from the simple to the complex, from lower to higher, and therefore implies organic evolution. Why aren't things getting simpler as well? Both directions make that assumption. This is considered by geologists to be a tremendously important key to the interpretation of geologic history. Modern biologists in turn regard this presupposed and falsified geologic record as the cornerstone of their hypothesis of organic evolution. It is common to read statements in biologic literature to the effect that although modern biologic research has been unable to agree on the method by which evolution is brought about genetically or to provide examples of evolution occurring on any large scale today, it is nevertheless proved to be a fact by the paleontologic record. The record's not a fact in the first place. Everything's a fact after that, and you can't question it. It's kind of a sacred thing. Evolution of the animal and plant world is considered by all those entitled to judgment to be a fact for which no further proof is needed. But in spite of nearly a century of work and discussion, there is still no unanimity in regard to the details of the means of evolution. Richard Goldschmidt. Evolution is viewed by one geneticist. It is true that nobody thus far has produced a new species or a genus, etc., by macromutation. It is equally true that nobody has produced even a species by the selection of micromutations. In the best-known organisms like Drosophila, innumerable mutants are known. If we were able to combine 1,000 or more of such mutants in a single individual, this still would have no resemblance whatsoever to any type known as a new species in nature. The following quotation indicates the emphasis that the evolutionists place on his false interpretation of the fossil record to largely prove out his false model of evolution. Although the comparative study of living animals and plants may give the very convincing circumstantial evidence, fossils provide the only historical documentary evidence that life has evolved from simpler to more complex forms. In actuality, according to the fossil record, proves that all life is complex, with many similarities shared among species, and all species living contemporaneously, because that's what we can only observe. Can't go by in the past. Nobody's built a time machine yet. These quotations from outstanding evolutionary authorities, both in geology and biology, demonstrate the great importance of the paleontological record to the theory of evolution. In turn, the principles of evolution and uniformity are seen to be of paramount importance in the correlation of the geologic strata. These principles are absolutely basic, both from the point of view of the history of the development of modern geology and from that of present interpretation of geologic field data. The circular reasoning here should be evident. Indeed, it is evident even to many historical geologists, For example, R.H. Restall, lecturer in economic geology at Cambridge University, says, "It cannot be denied that from a strictly philosophical standpoint, geologists are here arguing in a circle. The succession of organisms have been determined by a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the remains of organisms that they contain. How old are the rocks? As old as the fossils. Well, how old are the fossils? As old as the rocks." Sounds like a childhood rhyme. Well, Restall, in a geology article in the Encyclopedia Britannica, "It is maintained by many stratigraphers, individuals studying the origin, composition, succession, and distribution of rock strata, that other factors, especially that of superposition, layered positions of the strata, are also important in geologic correlation, and that in general these factors justify the usual assignment of ages to strata on the basis of their fossil contents. The usual situation, however, is that only a few formations are ever superposed in any one locality, and that it is very difficult or impossible to correlate strata in different locations by this principle of superposition. It's hardly ever identical, one rock strata location to another all around the planet. The fossils must be resorted to, and the fossil sequence is falsely assumed to accord with the principle of evolution. You can't assume that evolution is true and then turn around and find a fossil that proves it. Furthermore, even where superposed strata are exposed, it is rather often happens that the fossils appear to be in reverse order from that demanded by the evolutionary history, which paradox is commonly explained by the assumption without proof that the strata have been folded or faulted out of their original sequence. I remember reading about that, about a 200-mile fault where the geologic positions of the rocks were against the position that the evolutionists have maintained. They said, well, it was an uplift, 200 miles of it, without any rubble or anything. Just kind of like sucked up with a straw and redeposited. How about the worldwide flood? Just happened to have that rock strata in there, deposited it right on top of one that came before that, a little bit of a wave of a flood, and another one comes back, and so you have a reverse order because of the worldwide flood. All right. Consider this statement by Schubert and Dunbar. In any particular region, the sequence of geologic events is clearly known by the order of superposition of undeformed sedimentary formations. Evolutionists, by the use of the word undeformed in the context above, indicate that they only consider formations as normal which do not contradict the order indicated in their falsified geologic timescale established and upheld by themselves. In other words, well, this doesn't meet your standard. Well, it was undeformed. How? I don't know. The other formations, which are innumerable, they classify arbitrarily and falsely as deformed. Actually, they are not deformed at all, but are an expected sedimentary deposit of a flooded condition on the earth. Oh, there you go, flood. Of course, there are many places where the succession has been locally inverted by folding or interrupted by faulting, but such exceptions will betray themselves in the evidences of disturbance and in the unnatural succession of the fossils. Wow. However, this is not the case. Evidence of disturbances are not found when fossils so frequently occur out of the expected order. Consider what Schindwolf says. The sedimentary rocks by themselves, however, do not yield any specific time marks, setting aside the old law of superposition, which can provide relative age indicators only in a restricted manner, and which is unfit for age correlations. Moreover, it may be misleading in some cases. The beds in a section may be overturned, or, owing to a hidden thrust plane, older beds may overlie younger ones. If it's hidden, well, it's hidden. We don't see it, but it's hidden. And I'm a geologist, and you're not. Okay, the only chronometric scale applicable in geologic history for the stratigraphic classification of rocks and for dating geological events exactly is furnished by the fossils. Owing to the irreversibility of evolution, they offer an unambiguous timescale for relative age determinations and for a worldwide correlation of rocks. Shinewolf again goes on. In other words, the geologic and fossiliferous formations in real life hardly ever conform to the falsely fabricated geologic timetable of the evolutionists that appear in so many textbooks. So they resort instead to arbitrary and false assignments of specific ages to specific fossils without any proof, never considering the possibility that all life forms were created in the beginning. And perhaps those deposits, rock strata, were done by a huge amount of water all at once. The basis for the apparent great strength of the present system of historical geology is here clearly seen. Provision is made ahead of time for any contrary evidence that might be discovered in the field. The geologic time sequence has been built up primarily on the tacit assumption of organic evolution, which theory in turn derives its chief support from the geologic sequence thus presented as actual historical evidence of the process. Fragments of the sequences thus built up often appear legitimately superposed in a given exposure, but there are never more than a very few formations exposed at any one locality, occupying only a small portion of the geologic column. Formations from different localities are integrated into a continuous sequence almost entirely by means of the principle of organic evolution. It is what we say it is because we're paleontologists. And when, as frequently occurs, strata are found superposed but with the fossils in the inverse order, this paradox is resolved by saying that the strata must have been inverted through faulting or folding, whether or not there is any physical evidence thereof. Hardly ever is. When superposed strata are found with intervening systems missing, this is explained by the assumption of a corresponding period of erosion rather than deposition. This neatly packaged system of geologic interpretation has the effect of making it practically impossible ever to dislodge it by any amount of contrary evidence. And there is a whole bunch. The claim is merely made by evolutionists that it is possible to interpret geology in terms of slow processes acting over long periods of time, not that it is necessary to do so. One may in fact read at length in Lyell and in words of the other early uniformitarian geologists without finding more than essentially this claim. Uniformitarianism, in other words, has simply been assumed, not proved. Catastrophism has simply been denied, not refuted. But as a matter of fact, it is not even true that uniformity is a possible explanation for most of the Earth's geological formations, as any candid examination of the facts ought to reveal. So we have these charts, presupposed geologic timetable, presumed main divisions and events of geological time. We've seen this in many textbooks. 200, 500 million years ago. Wow. It's a billion years. All right. We'll see this next time.